Koopy, listen, please. I promise you I'll do whatever it takes to become a stronger Koopa for you. I've made my choice, and I'm not turning back.
Somewhere after midnight, in my wildest fantasy, somewhere just beyond my reach, is someone reaching back for me. Racing on the thunder and rising with the heat. It's gonna take a Superman to sweep me off my feet.
Koops is awkward, vulnerable, and quite frankly, a dork. And I freaking love him. Let's see how he stacks up against TTYD without Mario's meddling. Can you beat Paper Mario with $1,000 door with only Koops? Let's find out now. Greetings to you. My name is Arantula, and here we redefine the challenge in challenge running. If this is your first time here and you're a fan of super difficult challenges, subscribe with notifications on and be amazed at the upcoming challenges I have to offer you. Let's talk about Koops right now. Koops is a very ground-oriented character who specializes in sweeping rows of enemies with Power Shell. He's strong, especially when getting into his ultra rank moves like Shell Slam, which ignores defense, and Shell Shield, which extends Mario's longevity, allowing him to survive for longer and keep the fight going. His single point of defense also enables some tactics to work, involving just having the defense to not take damage against certain bosses with good guarding. Despite his many strengths, however, he also has some notable weaknesses. Namely, being a Koopa means he can't attack airborne enemies, so we need items to get around that. And with a maximum of 10 items at a time with no strength stack, we're going to need to be very strategic in order to not be left high and dry. There's also his susceptibility to being flipped, rendering him helpless if he gets knocked down, but that's easily remedied by just having good guarding. Most of the time. The rules of this challenge are as follows. Only Koops can be used in battle when we get him. Exception exists for the Iron Cleps and the latter half of Chapter 4. Koops must always be in the front in battle. Aim the Super Guard as few times as you possibly need to. Dropped items after battles are forbidden. I cannot spend money to receive items unless required. This does not apply to badges. No Zesty, meaning no items can be cooked. With all that out of the way, it's showtime! Now, in my Pokemon challenges, I just use a universal Pokemon randomizer to start with my Pokemon of choice. But in TTYD, it's not practical to start with Koops, especially when he's the second partner you have access to. So instead, this run doesn't officially start until after getting Koops in my party, and it's only then that my rules come into play. If you need a refresher on the rules, I have them in the description along with the music I'll be using throughout the entire video. If also you want to see some social media links, they'll be down there too. Let's continue. Because we can't really target airborne enemies without using items in battle, we often are forced to run from any loadouts of enemies with airborne foes. Now, if I had the courage to Super Guard, I would, but since Koops gets knocked on his back if he gets struck by any certain moves, and Head Bonks as well as the swoops that the Paragoombas have are some of those moves, you know, it'd just be extremely risky and not even really worth trying. Especially since this is an RPG where you really don't have to battle enemies if you want to make any progress. This is actually one of the things that I really like about TTYD. Grinding is practically non-existent, for the most part anyway. In casual runs, it's completely non-existent. In this run, however, that might not necessarily be the case. A rule of thumb, by the way, is that if there are any offensive items like Power Blocks or Fire Flowers or Thunder Rages, you want to hold on to them for as long as you possibly can until you get to a fight where they're outright required to progress. It wouldn't make very much sense to just spam Thunder Rages on Goombas and then get left high and dry against like Lakitus, right? So then, anyhow, let's talk about the first boss, Hooktail. With no access to shops, you only have access to 4 mushrooms, which I was hoping would be enough, but over the course of the battle, I soon figured out that it really wouldn't be. And simply put, keep this in mind also, Hooktail is a boss designed around attack effects are. A badge that makes Hooktail weaker when Mario attacks her while wearing the badge. But because Mario can't attack at all, this super gnarly dragon is a huge threat as the first freaking boss in the game! A bit of trivia about her AI, by the way, is that Hooktail's first 2 attacks are scripted. The first move she will ever use will always be her Fire Breath, which has an attack power of 4 and hits both Koops and Mario at the same time. And since that move pierces, it doesn't really do Koops any good to have that shell because it's not going to help him here. The second move that she will, however, use is her Stomp attack, which has an attack of 5 but doesn't pierce, so it only does 4 damage to Koops. Because of Hooktail's erratic AI, completely dependent on whenever she feels like using Fire Breath, at any point, she can just use Fire Breath 9 times, and that's when Mario dies. My plan for this fight entirely revolved around the badges we have, Mega Rush P and Last Stand P. We needed for Hooktail's AI to cooperate. She had to use Stomp enough times, whereas Koops would fall on HP, but Mario wouldn't, while also having Koops do damage until he ends up falling into peril after we run out of mushrooms to then knock her out while we're in peril. Why in peril? That's where Mega Rush P comes in. When your partner is in peril, their attack stat increases by a whopping 5. That may not sound like a lot, but in an RPG with numbers this small, it's an incredible difference, believe me. If you don't, watch this video right here when the video is over. It will show you just exactly how necessary Mega Rush P was to win this fight. Likewise, Last Stand P was also extremely important, as it helped minimize the damage the Hooktail could do to Koops, and made it drastically easier to actually fall into peril in the first place to use Mega Rush P. However, at the end of the day, we still didn't have all the resources we needed from the finite pool that we had to pull from. Once we ran out of mushrooms, yes, we did knock Hooktail to 0 HP, but she has a second phase. And by now, we don't have the HP to survive any longer, and we get picked off just like that. We needed more HP recovery, but the only option we had left were the Candy Pops and Petal Meadows, which can drop infinite horsetails from whacking them with your hammer. With an extra 4 horsetails, in a fight that spans 21 turns. Finally, we can survive this fight with the resources we have available to us. If only we get lucky still. Remember that Hooktail, if she uses Fire Breath 9 times, one of them being scripted and required to happen, we lose. On an attempt that I got where I would have won, I also had the audience throw a heart at me, which threw up my manipulation of my damage. And that I actually thought was going to cost me the fight. But then I was also getting items from the audience like mushrooms and maple syrups, and I decided, okay, frick it, the game is giving me items, I'll take it, I'll just take the good luck, let's move on from this fight. This was the first boss, by the way, not counting Blooper, and this is how hard it was. Look forward to what's coming up later in this video. Chapter 1 is finally over with, let's move to Chapter 2. With my newfound Power Plus P, a second Last Stand P from Rogueport perks for the lovely House of Badges, and the damage dodge just west of the pipe leading to Bogley Woods, I have everything needed for the next set of bosses coming up. First is the Shadow Sirens. There's no strategy here. Just spam Power Shell, Power Plus P equipped, and guard whenever you can, and you can't guard either Vivian's Fiery Jinx or Marilyn's Lightning, but everything else is fair game. I'd use bullet points here, but this fight is so easy, a 7-year-old could do it without even playing the game before. There's also a damage dodge P within the Bogley tree, and a ton of star pieces available now thanks to the Super Boost upgrade. Magnus Von Grapple is the second boss of the game, and Magnus, let me just tell you right now, is a far cry from Hooktail. This is a very easy battle if you have a good strategy in play. I had damage dodge P for defense, Power Plus P, and Mega Rush P for offense as well. And all you have to really do is just keep on the attack and guard almost everything, including the X-Fists. The only thing you have to do from this point forward, along with guarding everything you can, is to not guard just one of the punches that the X-Fist will hit you with. If you do that correctly, you will be able to knock out Magnus without any trouble at all. If you guard everything, however, you will end up not being able to reach peril without using any items, and that would also mean that you potentially will die if you're not properly outfitted. The reason you want to guard the X-Fist and not, say, the Smothering Stomp or the Quake Attack, the X-Fist always attacks the player in front. The Smothering Stomp, you cannot really tell who it's attacking when he chooses to use it, and he can always just choose to only attack Mario, which wouldn't help us at all, whereas the Quick Attack can flip Koops over. So of course you definitely don't want to not guard that. So sure enough, I did in fact have a single death to Magnus, if only because I was just for one time too careful. Once we scrapped that unimpressive fighting robot, I had the Dazzle the perks as Flower Saver P and Happy Heart P. I also got Peekaboo and Flower Finder since there really was not much else I cared about buying. Chapter 3 takes us to the floating city of Glitzville. While here, we get some extremely important badges ranging from Mario's copy of Last Stand, and especially Charge P. This badge that we get halfway through Chapter 3 is invaluable for what's coming up later. Its potential will be realized in this very chapter. As far as some fights in the Glitz Pit, I have to admit that a few fights require me to use items to advance because of airborne enemies like Lakitus and Magikoopas. Speaking of Lakitus, here's a question for you. How do you pronounce Lakitu? Do you pronounce it like how I do, or Lakitu? Tell me in the comments down below. While brawling in the Glitz Pit, we also fight Bowser, who was random and really not much else. Really, I just have to keep Mario safe, and there really was nothing to worry about here at all. He only has 30 HP also, which is no higher than that of Hooktail basically when you combine her two phases, and I believe the same with Magnus. So he may not be very threatening here, but trust you me, he becomes a nightmare later in the game. On the contrary, the Koopinator exists, and despite not being a major boss, this guy was freaking tough as nails. Which I guess makes sense since I really didn't have much of a choice but to not use items during this fight. Not to mention that he has a potentially much higher attack set than Hooktail when he chooses to charge, which also makes it much more unpredictable to try getting into peril and actually deal a lot of damage to him with Mega Rush P. I am able to beat him, but mainly because I got lucky more than actually having a good strategy or being able to overpower him with good enough tactics. Rock Hawk was not fun. Now, the fight was pretty standard until he grabbed the ceiling, where I can't afford to knock him down with an attacking item, and status items wouldn't actually knock him down either. And once he jumped on me, I was basically dead. Really, the only way I was able to win this fight is if I got lucky with Sleepy Sheep putting him to sleep, so there is some RNG involved in this fight. In case you're wondering, Rock Hawk has a max HP of 40. Once his HP drops below 14, and he already executed his Superman Slam, which is basically like a cross chop if you saw it in Stenora's Pokemon attack, that's when he'll go for the ceiling. So what you have to do then is use the Sleepy Sheep before you get him to that HP value, and then start charging your attack. Be mindful of Rock Hawk's HP and his ego, and strike him when he doesn't expect it. That's how you get the win. Insert joke about Rock Hawk here. You children. We are now the champions of the Glitz Pit, but that may very well be short-lived as now we have to battle Macho Grubba, the final boss of Chapter 3. And I say final boss because you have Bowser, you have the Dark Koopa Troll, and you have Rock Hawk. I think it's a fair assessment to make here. Now, this is a fight where not being able to super guard does make it a fair bit harder, because Grubba does a lot of damage, especially if he soups himself up. It's also more important than ever before that I get the Great on the action command for Shell Shield, because otherwise, it's not going to protect Mario for more than one hit. At least until he starts charging himself, and then it won't really matter, but that's only if he does choose to charge himself. If he just tries to power himself up, or he just tries to go for defense or evasion, then yeah, you absolutely do want to hit as much HP in that Shell Shield as you possibly can muster. Because this is one of those fights where Macho Grubba can hit you really hard, you ideally want to bring at least some kind of healing items with you here. Raw offense just won't be enough, and you can't manipulate your HP when the AI is so erratic here too. Just remember also, don't save your game after confronting Grubba about the paper with the crystal star about it, or you just might find yourself between a rock and a hard place. Keep in mind that you cannot go back outside the Glitz Pit until you beat the boss of Chapter 3, or at least before you confront him, so take in caution. With that taken care of, we now have 3 crystal stars, leaving only 4 to go, and no sign of the X-Knots this time around either. Now, barring some Glitz Pit loadouts, there really were not very many bosses that were airborne, so Koops didn't really have to be tested that much in that field. But some of the later chapters are going to have that problem become very prevalent. So click this video on the screen right now and go check out the bosses like Cortez and Smorg and how we have to handle them. I'll see you next time.